in Environmental Studies at the University of Malaya. Of course, he is part of the Youth Cluster and the consultative panel on climate change under NRES. So, off to you, Aidil.
All right, thank you so much, Anusha. Welcome, YB Nik Nazmi, on the stage with me in this session in the Hot Seats Fireside Chat for the Youth Climate Adaptation Forum. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Let's get loose a little bit. In the end, this is a youth event, and with COP29 reaching ahead, the global goal on adaptation, the GGA, requires international intervention, but also national efforts, like the formulation of the National Adaptation Plan, or MINA. There is so much at stake here when it comes to climate change. Imagine how much aura we would lose if we don't adapt to climate change, right? There will be no Mudang, no Brat, no Chaperowan on a dead planet, right? So that brings us here today to this discussion with the Minister himself, the Minister of Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability, YB Nik Nazmi, to address climate adaptation concerns in Malaysia. So, give me a minute to introduce him. Nik Nazmi Nik Ahmad is Malaysia's Minister of Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability, NRES, and the Member of Parliament for the Setiawangsa constituency in Kuala Lumpur. He is also the Vice President of the People's Justice Party, Keadilan. A graduate of King's College London, where he read law, he worked as an executive in Permodalan Nasional Berhad, PNB, before joining Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's office as his private secretary. In the 2008 general elections, he was elected as Selangor State Assemblyman for the Seri Setia constituency and was the youngest candidate that year. He was appointed as the political secretary to the then Selangor Chief Minister. Nik Nazmi was re-elected in Seri Setia in 2013, later becoming Deputy Minister for the Selangor State Legislative Assembly and then State Executive Councillor, State Minister for Education, Human Capital Development, Science, Technology and Innovation. In 2014, he was elected as Keadilan Youth Leader, and then in 2017 became Youth Leader for the Pakatan Harapan PH Alliance. In 2018 general elections, he was elected to Malaysia's Parliament representing the Setiawangsa constituency. Then in 2022, he was elected as one of Keadilan's vice presidents, and in the general elections later that year, successfully defended the Setiawangsa seat. With the formulation of the unity government led by Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, Nik Nazmi was then appointed as Minister of Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change in 2022. And now, Nik Nazmi is also the author of several books, including Malaysian Sun, A Progressive Political Journey in the Heart of Southeast Asia. So my first question to you, YB Nik Nazmi, with so much going on ahead of COP29 and what's happening here in the local context of climate change, we're dealing a lot with floods, heat waves, and many other climate change impacts. What are top priorities for Malaysia when it comes to climate adaptation, and what can we anticipate on the upcoming National Adaptation Plan?
Okay, thank you, Aidil. You read a very long CV, which reminds people how old I am. So I'm not too pleased with that. And don't promote my books. I think I would rather promote my TikTok account. I still don't have enough followers there. And one last comment. It's very weird when we have fireside chats in Malaysia because we can't conceptualize what fireside chats are because we don't have firesides in Malaysia, right? So maybe it should be like, sembang kedai kopi, cafe chats. Okay, I will answer your question, don't worry. I think as we develop our, what we call MINA, our Malaysia National Adaptation Plan, this is something that we want to focus on because adaptation tends to be the poorer cousin compared to mitigation, right? Both are important. But we like to talk about energy transition, how we reduce our carbon footprint and all that, which is all well and good. But as a small contributor in absolute numbers to the carbon emissions, even if we do our part. And we also know that in today's timeline, at the best case, we are looking at 1.5 degrees, and that's looking tougher and tougher. The bottom limit is 2 degrees Celsius temperature increase. That means that there will be impacts to the environment, even if we keep it within 2 degrees. So adapting to this climate change is very, very crucial, right? So for us, this adaptation plan is to enhance the resilience of the economy, businesses, infrastructure, the environment, natural resources, but most importantly to the communities, to the people who are living in Malaysia. And so for us, this includes strengthening the capacity of NRES, the ministry, because this is something that is new, adaptation. Across the world, everyone is still trying to work this out. So we also need to work with key partners in the public and private sectors. There are many ministries that also need to be part of the solution. Transport, economic ministry, Ministry of Finance, commodities, a lot, investment and trade. They all also need to be at the table. At the same time, we also need private sector input, and we need the community input with regards to preparing our adaptation plan. So that's why, as I mentioned, the 5 priority areas: water and coastal resources, agriculture and food security, infrastructure and cities, public health and forestry and biodiversity. These are the key parts that will form our National Adaptation Plan. So we will definitely look at children and youth by focusing on the impacts of climate change to these vulnerable groups. And this includes targeted research in order how we prepare the adaptation strategies, also on raising awareness, although I tend to say that in many parts of Malaysia, we don't have to raise awareness at all among the young. You are very, very aware. You're much more aware than the older generation. But it's actually to find ways that we can take action together and also to listen to you, for us to be aware to what you want rather than the other way around. And I think there's also a lot with our indigenous communities who are living at the forefront of climate change. They're living near the forest. They have always lived in harmony with nature for so long. We need to tap into the indigenous and traditional knowledge of how we can deal with climate change and how we can adapt better. One of the things that we tend to forget, right? Adaptation has always been there because that's how human civilization is. If you notice, houses among the Austronesian people, the Malay Polynesian people from Southeast Asia all the way to the Pacific, to the Madagascar, one of the key criteria is that they are always on stilts. Why? Because we are so used to having flats. And so that is a natural adaptation that we are so used to. But now, we don't want to live on stilts anymore. We want to build houses on the ground. And as a result, we are much more exposed to the consequences of climate change. So there's a lot of things that we can tap in as we build this National Adaptation Plan, and I think this will be a crucial document for us to refer to. It will be a living document for us to refer to as we go on and face the various challenges caused by climate change.
Thank you, Nik Nazmi. I love that you brought up going back into your traditional roots, going back to indigenous knowledge, in a sense to adapt to climate change. And I'll keep your word to consulting with young people. And I love this recent movement of making this consultation for the climate change bill more accessible to the public. I helped to manage to brought it up on my Twitter account, managed to get about 600, 700 retweets, and I think people are interested in giving their inputs and comments on the climate change bill proposal, and I hope you do the same for the National Adaptation Plan, the same strategy, especially when it comes to consulting young people in adaptation. My second question is that children and young people are amongst of the groups that face the greatest challenges and impacts of climate change. What is Malaysia doing to ensure these groups, children and young people, protected in the face of climate change? Malaysia ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC, in 1995. Since then, the rights of all children and young people to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment have been recognized as a fundamental human right. How will Malaysia's upcoming climate plans uphold these rights?
Okay, first and foremost, I think we really need to tap into one of the most important institutions for children and youth, which is the schools. Some people suggest that we should make a new subject on environment or on climate change. I don't believe that, because I think, while I look at the curriculum that my son has to go through, it's challenging enough as it is, right? I don't want to add more books into his heavy school bag. I don't want to add more subjects into his already full schedule. But what I think we can do is actually to blend in climate awareness or environmental awareness into existing subjects. Subjects such as science, geography, or even language, where we can incorporate that so it's blended into the existing subjects. And I think that is something that is very, very critical. And I think another good example is that my daughter is, she's 8, right? And she will fight with me to collect plastic bottles and old newspapers and stuff, because she also has a competition in school and she's very eager to win, to have someone with the most, the heaviest recyclables to bring to school within 1 week. So it's between me and her fighting to get these things. And I think that is actually something that's positive, because it creates this awareness from a very young age. When you are someone old like me, it's very difficult to change our habits. But when you're young, that is where habits are formed, and it lasts a lifetime, and that's very critical. The other part is also, we need to have, in terms of youth empowerment and capacity building, there needs to be more platforms for children and youth to engage in adaptation planning, participating in national consultations, as you mentioned, but also, depending on the age group, right? If you're 8, you're 9, unless you're a super geek or super genius, probably there are certain levels of how you participate that cannot be the same for someone who's 15 or 17, right? So like yesterday, I know, because my son always pesters me on Robux, to get in Robux. I can't understand, but anyway, so I saw a game here in iGEM where MGTC created an environmental game for adults and for children on Roblox. And that is another creative way of gamification, making it fun to learn about sustainability. And maybe that is something that we should do more. But yeah, people are very aware at a very young age today. Last year, our youngest delegate to COP28 in Dubai, and I met him, was a 12-year-old boy. And he was so earnest and so serious, right? I was trying to crack jokes, and either I wasn't funny or he was very serious. But he was so into it. He was so serious into it, and I think that was I was really I was in awe, and I think that shows that the level of sophistication among the younger generation is really great. And I think it's also to ensure that you always have your place at the table in terms of decision making, right? Not just, there is a tendency sometimes for big organizations, for governments, when we say engagement, we tick the box. We've done our engagement, right? But then you see nothing changes in the bill or in the policy. The bill that you see at the beginning of the consultation process, and at the end, there's no change, right? Either it's very perfect or we didn't listen. There are only two possibilities. So what I'm saying is that we need meaningful engagement, where your voices are truly heard, because there's no perfect knowledge anywhere, neither from the NGO side or from the government side or from the private sector side. So when there are gaps and there can be improvements, so we should act on it, right? And I think that should be a humility that everyone should have. So I think that is where my approach, I'm trying to take with youth groups as we develop the climate change bill, and we will do the same for the National Adaptation Plan and other initiatives.
Thank you so much, YB Nik Nazmi, for your answer. Looking forward to those meaningful consultations as well. Gonna go a bit of deep dive into the technical part of the National Adaptation Plan. On my third question, Malaysia has set ambitious goals for climate adaptation. How does the NAP, or the National Adaptation Plan, is going to facilitate collaboration and coordination among various government agencies, private sectors, and communities to address systemic vulnerabilities and build resilience against projected climate risks? How does NAP is going to facilitate collaboration and coordination between these agencies? And I just wanted to know, because we do have this problem with sort of isolated agencies, right? So how are you going to harmonize communities, private sector, government agencies towards NAP?
Yes, one of the things that, and I'm truly appreciative. I mentioned it, I think yesterday when I spoke at the opening of IGEM, is we have a Climate Action Council which is chaired by the Prime Minister. So various ministers that are relevant to the issue sit on in the meeting. There are also some outside. We have some individual experts there, and obviously my ministry acts as the secretariat for that discussion. And the state governments are also there because they are on the ground. They control forests, they control land. So we involve all of the stakeholders in this meeting, and that is an important forum for us to actually to do policy that cuts across the different ministries. So when we wanted to do the climate change bill, we wanted to set our net zero target, it's always been brought to this council. Then they formalized at the cabinet level, so that we can get the 360 view from various ministries, from various state governments, and also other stakeholders. And the positive thing is that you would think that my ministry will be the only one that is fighting hard for ambitious goals or to fight climate change. And if you are Ministry of Economy, you'll just be focusing on GDP growth. If you are Ministry of Investment and Trade, it's just about opening as many factories as possible, regardless of whether it's a dirty factory or a clean factory. But when we wanted to set net zero 2050, MITI and Ministry of Economy were the ones who were so passionate to push for it, right? So I am thankful because I think in a different situation, I heard that there were in previous governments many years back where it was very difficult for the Minister of Environment to get his paper approved whenever the investment minister was there, and he had to wait when the investment minister was not around to get ambitious environmental papers approved, right? Fortunately, I don't have that problem, and I have a very supportive Prime Minister who understands this. So I'm very lucky. The other part is that I think, but once you have this National Adaptation Plan, it's sort of a master document. It's a reference point that allows stakeholders from public and private sectors to be able to collaborate and to refer to. And I think through the awareness sessions and the fact that now it's a lot of things are happening in silo. We have adaptation plans, for example. I think Penang, they've done their own. I think it's been quite successful. I think Yayasan Hasanah is doing one in Perak or in Kuala Kangsar. I can't remember specifically, but we need one that is for the entire country, and then we can look at the localized versions, right, to be the more granular versions of the big document. So I think that will be a major reference point, and vulnerable communities can also benefit from this because they can see what's the outline all about, and that will be the key benefits of having the National Adaptation Plan.
All right, I'm going to ask you one last question before we move into a question from the public. We're going to go through that through Slido. But you spoke a lot about being a parent, right? And I think that holds you to a big responsibility as both a minister and a father. So when your children ask you about climate change, how do you talk to them about the impacts of climate change in a way that is simple but also honest? I really want to ask you, in this perspective, maybe not as a minister, but as a father holding this position, how would you speak to our children about climate change and its impacts with honesty and simplicity?
Oh, you saved the most difficult question for last. Well, I think one of the things, I like to use this parable. Imagine, we are in a family that we've inherited this house for many, many, many years. A sort of an heirloom, an ancestral home, in a kampung somewhere for many, many generations back. And it has always been passed from one generation to another in a very good condition. This house is now in our hands. I'm the father, then there's my wife, and there's the kids. We're in the house, right? And one of the what do you call that? Then suddenly, we see that there's fire or a flood at the house. How do you deal with that? Do you just sit there looking at the fire, looking at the flood, and just, having a fatalistic thought and just like, let's die? Or do we deny and pretend, we watch Netflix and say, no, we can ignore the fire out there in spite of smelling the smoke? Or we do our best to save this family heirloom that we've probably inherited for thousands of years. We don't have wooden houses that are thousands of years, but probably hundreds of years in Malaysia. We probably do that, right? That's the natural thing to do. But if you find that that's impossible, that it's getting worse, the best thing to do is to actually leave the house and save your family. If we compare this with us, and this is our planet, when I talk to my kids, at the very least, if you have that house, you can still try and find another house, right? So, by going back to your talk about a planet without humans, right? If only there is a planet B for us to live in, then that's fine, right? But there is no. Elon Musk has not created. They have not invented rockets to go to a planet B because there's no planet B, right? No matter what he wants. So that, I believe, is how I tell them that this is the time for action. We have this window to do something. It's not all doom and gloom because there are people who accept climate science, but they think that there's nothing that can be done. So we have this window of opportunity, and it's crazy if we do not take this opportunity to save what we've inherited, and of course to try and pass it down the same way as much as possible on how we inherited it before. So I think that is how I would describe climate change and the urgent action now needed to the younger generation.
Yeah. And that's on climate optimism, y'all. Okay, so climate optimism is so important, and that's how we're supposed to communicate climate change, right? It's not all doom and gloom, and providing a window of hope is really important, especially when you're talking to younger children and young people as well, when it comes to climate change. I do want to give the opportunity to the floor to ask questions. We're going to pop up slider on the screen for the participants to scan the QR code and ask some questions. And then, so please scan the QR code if you have some questions to address. We will cover not all the questions, unfortunately, because we are running out of time a little bit. So, please do so, and then we'll address them here on the stage.
So just a thumbs up, which is good.
Yeah, yes. Could we share some of the questions if anyone has? Okay, I see some questions already. So unfortunately, because I'm sort of blind here, if I look at the screen, I'm gonna be like Ariana Grande or Jimmy Fallon, like that. So I was wondering if we could pop up on the screen, or if the minister can also, if you have any questions that you want to address. There are a lot of questions here from the young people, I'm assuming, about climate adaptation. You can feel free to choose any of the questions that you feel you want to address.
I saw one on how to balance sustainability and economic growth, which is a good question. And I think it's a valid one, a very relevant one for a developing country like Malaysia. And I go back to Kate Raworth's donut economics. So there are the planetary, if you have a donut, right? The outer limit is the planetary limit, right? So we should not be exceeding that if we are to be able to pass down a livable planet for our children. We've actually exceeded a lot of those limits, right? In terms of there's carbon emission, carbon in the atmosphere, in terms of probably exploitation of resources, use of water, so on and so forth, right? And that is the limit that we have to try our best to keep within. And that's the battle when we have with the issue of protecting our planet and climate change. But at the same time, there is that inner circle, right? The hollow part of the donut, which are the basic things that we need to fulfill. Whether we like it or not. I mean, we like to blame Industrial Revolution for climate change, which is true, but it has also brought us enormous benefits. The progress. People didn't live as long as this in the past. People will not, you will not be able to study at night or watch Netflix in the past because you didn't have lights, right? And that's actually good for humankind, right? So there are many parts in the world, many parts in Malaysia, some parts in Malaysia where people have not even reached those minimal level of whether they have access to electricity. They're talking about 24/7 reliable electricity. They do not have access to clean water. They do not have access to all those things, and nutrition, right? So the challenge is always to ensure that we can meet the inner limits, to ensure that everyone in a just transition, inclusive transition, can be able to fulfill that thing without exceeding the outer limits, right? So that is the challenge, easier said than done. But going back to this principle of, in terms of priority, planet, people, profit, right? It has to be planet first, because at the end of the day, if there's no planet, there'll be no people and there'll be no profit. But then the next priority should be the people, right? Because, well, we are people. So I understand that we need profits in order to grow our economy, in order to redistribute, to fund schools and all that. But it can only come when there's a healthy planet and there are healthy people.
All right. I think we're nearing the end of our fireside chat. We'll collect the questions that we have. I've seen that we have about 50 plus responses, so we're really grateful for that. So we're going to collect that in the end. But towards...
Can I take one?
Yeah, sure.
Last one. Okay. I think I'm just interested. I mean, there's a lot of questions, but I saw one that you said that only NRES seems proactive. MINDEF, MKN, and so backwards to work on climate change. Interesting question. First, obviously, we are proactive. It's our ministry, right? But I think to be fair, I've read books on climate resilient warfare and all that. Malaysia, we are not involved in any warfare. Compared to many other countries. So I think that it's a bit unfair. And they have different priorities, yes. We try to take a whole of government approach, but the carbon footprint of our military, because our military is basically a very peaceful, defensive military, is pretty much zero, I can say, right? But we do try, and other agencies, other ministries, they are trying agriculture and all that. It's not easy, I have to say, but like I said, it helps. One, the most important person in the room is the Prime Minister, right? If the Prime Minister doesn't believe in what I do, then it's very difficult. I have very supportive Minister of Economy, Minister of Trade and Investment. It's not because we went to the same school, but anyway. But other ministries, youth and sports, higher education, they are all very supportive, and that to me is very helpful, right? So I think if you follow like the American media or the British media, it's a bit different. Obviously, carbon emissions for the American military matters, right? It doesn't matter for Malaysia.
Thank you so much, YB Nik Nazmi, for addressing that question. That brings us to the end, to the fireside chat. As a young person, I would like to relay my gratitude for being a pioneer, a minister that pioneers youth engagement when it comes to climate change, and particularly in the upcoming National Adaptation Plan. We're really grateful for that and setting up sort of spaces like the youth cluster of the consultation panel. But thank you so much, YB Nik Nazmi, for gracing our event today and being able to be as brutally as honest and simple and also optimistic when it comes to climate change in Malaysia. Let's give a round of applause to our minister.